Okay, 10,500 BC, the lock is almost perfect.
At that same date, the constellation Leo is aligned perfectly with the gaze of the Sphinx. So at 10,500 BC, even though the pyramids were built in 2,500 BC, we see a terrestrial alignment of the monuments on the Earth mimicking the stars in the sky.
So we have two constellations locking themselves with two sets of monuments, the Sphinx and the three pyramids, in 10,500 BC. It cannot be a coincidence.
Was it something they intuitively channeled, or did somebody else, someone from higher up, teach them all of this stuff and help them to build these monuments and help them to create these messages from ancient times to try to get us to appreciate who we really are, where we really came from, and why we're really here?
Might the builders of Egypt's pyramids and of the New Grange Passage tomb really have embedded in their structures a secret code, telling us about the otherworldly origins of the elite rulers of their societies? Herefordshire, England, June 30th, 1921. While horseback riding through the British countryside, amateur archaeologist Alfred Watkins notices that ancient features and structures across the landscape appear to be arranged along straight lines. 4 years later, in 1925, Watkins publishes The Old Straight Track, a book in which he proposes that man's earliest monuments and megaliths were linked by a network of long, straight tracks.
He referred to them as ley lines, but as to what these were, he could only really say that perhaps they were lines that were used by the ancients to communicate from one place to the next. In other words, they were simply markers on a journey.
Ley lines are mostly found in England and France. They're literally geographic markings between sacred sites. They might be old churches, they might be churches built on top of megalithic ruins, but you'll see dead straight lines between these sites that have been maintained.
The Michael line in England is a straight line, and it is measurable. It's a magnetic field line that you can measure, and it will be higher than other areas around it geographically.
In his book, Watkins further theorized that ancient landmarks along ley lines were deliberately placed by early man for the purpose of line-of-sight navigation.
Watkins believed they were trade routes originally, but later it was noticed that some of them went over really obscure terrain like mountains and bogs and streams and all this kind of stuff, so they couldn't really have been walking. So it seems more like they were kind of like a survey or a mapping system.
Some researchers believe that ley lines are magnetic in nature and delineate the lines of Earth's unseen energy fields. But if ley lines were useful for overland navigation to the ancients, might they also have been useful for aerial navigation by extraterrestrial visitors, as ancient astronaut theorists believe?
Something extraordinary happened along those ley lines because the once very physical and real visit of extraterrestrial beings has been forgotten.
Trelleborg, Denmark. Here, along the northern reaches of the European continent, lie the archaeological ruins of a Viking fortress dating to 900 AD. For decades, mainstream historians have been baffled by the precise nature of Trelleborg's perfectly circular design, with a courtyard divided into 4 zones, each with 4 long houses, and gateways open precisely to the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. Some believe such a strict geometric design would have required extensive knowledge of advanced engineering. The mystery deepened in 1982, when pilot Preben Hansen discovered a direct line of flight from Trelleborg to 3 other Viking fortresses, all constructed with a similar design.
Trelleborg was the starting point. 40 miles farther, another fort appeared. Then he found others, so that there was a line of 4 forts in Denmark. In Dänemark stattfand.
Given that the Vikings were basically seafaring people, and these sites are spread out so far over land at great distances, it implies that maybe they had some other way of getting to these places. Perhaps they even were able to fly. Now, how they would fly, what the technology was, it's a good question, but it seems unlikely that they would be able to find all these spots, survey them, and place monuments and structures there if they were simply a seafaring race.
These Viking fortresses are all on one straight line. You continue the one line straight ahead, over the Alps, for thousands and thousands of kilometers, and under the line, always holy places from antiquity, from Stone Age. And the line points directly to Delphi, Delphi in Greece. Delphi was the place of the god Apollo, and the mythology about Apollo says every year, 2 times, Apollo took his heavenly chariot, disappeared in a faraway land in the north. Apollo flies on one straight line. At several points he makes a stop. Wherever he makes a stop, the Stone Age people start to create a holy place of it, because here was a god.
Is it possible that the ley lines that connected early civilizations were actually flight paths, as ancient astronaut theorists believe? And might such flight paths have been used by extraterrestrial spacecraft?
The extraterrestrials in the past knew exactly that the future generation would develop technology, they would fly, they would measure, they would photograph their own land. So by photographing their land, they would realize something is strange here in the ground.
How could a straight line link ancient Egypt, the pyramids, the Oracle at Delphi in Greece, and Viking fortresses that would have been established thousands of years later? It made no sense. But it does make sense if these installations are along straight lines across the Earth's grid, and if somehow those straight lines mark navigation routes for ancient extraterrestrials that use them as markers to navigate the globe from society to society.
Is it possible that these ancient sites along the ley lines were nothing else but refueling stations for ancient astronaut craft? And the answer is yes, because just like today, a plane goes in straight lines. And if a plane needs to refuel, it lands at an airport that's on its course, and not, 1,000 miles to the east or 1,000 miles to the west. A plane flies straight.
It was suggested that UFOs may be connected in some way, because it could well be that they are following the paths of geomagnetic fields and different variations of different strengths that exist. It was often seen that UFOs seemed to either appear or descend or rise in connection with where the ley lines seem to intersect, and this has been seen time and time again around the world at different UFO hotspots.
Might the sacred sites along ancient flight paths really have been landing points, or perhaps fueling stations, for extraterrestrial space vehicles? Perhaps further evidence can be found by examining the ancient civilizations that are connected from opposite sides of the globe. Cusco, Peru. Here lie the impressive ruins of the ancient capital of the Inca Empire that thrived from the 13th to 15th century. Long suspected by ancient astronaut theorists to have been a place visited by extraterrestrial beings in the distant past, Cusco is considered to be an axis mundi, which in religion or mythology means the center or navel of the world.
They are very important sites, and quite often when you start looking at some sites like Cusco, Cusco literally means navel of the world. It was the navel of the empire of the Inca. So Cusco isn't unique. We really find naval sites everywhere. And the naval sites are quite often the most important sites of a culture. Jerusalem is one, the Giza Plateau is another.
World navals, because they lie along the Earth's magnetic grid, were places where the ancients created what can only be called heaven's gates, altars, places where human beings could communicate with otherworldly entities.
Evidence can also be found connecting Cusco with another world naval over 2,000 miles away in the South Pacific, Easter Island. Although mainstream historians and archaeologists believe the two places were never in contact in ancient times, Cusco and Easter Island feature strikingly similar styles of stonework, with colossal, multi-sided stones precisely fitted as if each joint was welded together.
The walls of Cusco are identical to the walls we can find in the base foundations of some of the moais on Easter Island. And those two places are so far apart. I wonder, how was it done? Either the builders traveled from one place to the other, or the builders in each culture were visited by the same teachers. The teachers from the stars, extraterrestrials.
Diese Navel der Welt, these navels of the world, might have been geodesic points, which you could use to navigate from the air. There are interesting accounts about this. For example, from Apollonius, who lived in Rome in 4 AD, that he descended with thunderbirds, that he had visited the city of the gods. There he was given talisman, which he was supposed to bury. There is a similar legend from Cusco. There, the children of the sun god are supposed to have plunged a rod into the earth. And there are similar legends on Easter Island.
But if Cusco and Easter Island were linked in ancient times by space travelers, what might this say about other centers of the world? A line drawn from Easter Island through the center of the Earth points to Mohenjo-Daro, Pakistan, a once great empire believed by ancient astronaut theorists to have been destroyed by a nuclear blast thousands of years ago. And from Nazca, Peru, a line through the Earth points to Angkor Wat, Cambodia, a site of great religious significance, known in ancient myths to have been built as a landing zone for sky beings. And astonishingly, these four sites lie on one circle around the globe, a circle that also includes the location of the Great Pyramids of Egypt.
This is really the underlying mystery, I think, which is not necessarily why were these monuments built, for what purpose, but also why were they built on those specific places. Because really, what we are beginning to understand is that all of these monuments from the past were not just built haphazardly on the surface of the earth, but were built in very specific locations.
It appears that ancient people either mapped the earth in some esoteric way that we can't comprehend yet, or it was sacred knowledge handed down over thousands of years.
Might such connections between ancient sites around the world suggest that there was some sort of strategic link between these civilizations, as ancient astronaut theorists believe? And if so, what could this mean? Before the advent of satellite-guided global positioning systems, the science of geodesy was used to determine the exact position of geographic points on the globe.
used by the gods were actually triangulation points to the landing corridor. Things like Baalbek in Lebanon or Jerusalem were actually extensive megalithic monuments or platforms that were used to launch spacecraft. And ancient man recorded stories around these locations of seeing great smoke, fire, and loud noise as these ships ascended or descended from these locations.
It's highly reasonable that the ancients had systems of navigation. I mean, we know the Romans did effectively that. And that was why they were so efficient at getting around their empire, in addition to their roads and keeping track of things.
In the early era of our own flight, pilots used markers, which would be church steeples or mountains and obvious physical monuments that they could see. Just like that, the ancient aliens, they were able to also use this world grid and the pyramids and obelisks and other monuments that were built at these special power places to navigate.
It's almost like the ancients were building these sites and they were mapping the planet in vast antiquity, possibly up to 10,000 or more years ago.
Because of the interaction between ancient civilization and ancient aliens, these ancient societies, recognizing the importance of these spots and the presence of ancient aliens, placed these monuments as a map for the star people, for the ancient aliens to follow and to direct them to the civilizations they might well have started by themselves as colonies.
Is it really possible that many of the world's most famous ancient sites were part of an interconnected network whose placement on the globe was planned tens of thousands of years ago by visitors from other galaxies, as ancient astronaut theories contend? Perhaps more evidence can be found among numerous strange symbols hidden in plain view along the northwest coast of France. The Gulf of Morbihan. Along the rocky coast of French Brittany is the small island of Gavrinus. Here lie the remains of a passage grave known as the Gavrinus tomb, built around 3500 BC.
Gavrinus is an extraordinary passage grave that illustrates highly advanced mathematical knowledge dating back to prehistoric times. What's really amazing about Gavrinus is that there are spirals and hand axes and almost things that look like fingerprints that have been carved onto the megalithic slabs. And mathematicians have determined that there are hidden messages, hidden mathematical messages.
When people came to Gavrini and they began to make measurements of how these stones were placed, they began to realize that these stones weren't just placed haphazardly in some kind of coincidental form, but actually displayed extraordinary understanding and knowledge of mathematics.
52 megalithic stones were used in the construction of the passage grave, of which 26 are engraved with unique symbols. By adding, dividing, and multiplying the numbers of symbols with significant stones or groups of stones, researchers have discovered the correct spherical size of the Earth, the number of days in a year, and the mathematical constant, pi.
Pi is a very special number in mathematics. Pi is a fundamental property of all circles. It's the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter.
These mathematicians have not only determined the numerical pi way before it was ever discovered, quote unquote, but also the exact longitude and latitude of the island. Now that is sensational, because why would Stone Age people know about the longitude and latitude of that particular island?
But do such findings of precise mathematical knowledge at Gavrinus, engraved there more than 5,000 years ago, its builders were leaving a secret code for future generations, as ancient astronaut theorists contend. If so, what might they have wanted to tell us?
We do see evidence of profound mathematical knowledge at work. The big question is, did we develop that ourselves, or is this an important aspect of the energy grid issue that was instilled upon us by ancient aliens, teaching us about mathematics because it was important in the very clear, precise construction of these huge structures?
None of this makes any sense unless the construction was directly commissioned by extraterrestrials because they knew that we'd have the wherewithal to decipher the message.
But is it really possible that the principles of advanced mathematics were brought to Earth and given to man by alien visitors? According to ancient astronaut theorists, the idea is not only possible, but probable.
There's no way that we could have achieved the moon landings, for instance, without a very advanced knowledge of higher mathematics that these ancient cultures seem to know way, way back many, many thousands of years.
This may be the reason that extraterrestrials wanted us to develop mathematical knowledge ourselves, because it's only with that special knowledge that we're able to advance into the skies and to the stars.
If you go back through history, let's say to Greece, Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Egypt, where there was clearly some of the most advanced astronomy and emergence of advanced mathematics, when these ancient civilizations were building hugely complex pyramids and beautiful Doric columns in Greece and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, is it possible that none of those had anything to do with the minds of humans at the time, but were actually the creation by non-humans who have interacted with this planet for thousands of years?
The Anunnaki that came here as gods to the Sumerian culture gave them a math system based on the number 12. And we see this number 12 being repeated throughout time, 12 hours in a day, 12 inches in a foot, 12 in a dozen. It spans very much into different parts of our culture.
There seems to be a single, universal, mathematical, geometric code for how the universe works, and somebody has been trying to get us to wake up to this fact for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Because ancient astronauts were aware that our development one day would reach a highly advanced technological status, they wanted to leave behind some type of a message, a type of secret code that needed to be deciphered by a future generation that understood or would understand what really happened in the past. And that generation is us.
The world energy grid, star alignments, ancient flight paths, and mathematics. Did ancient astronauts really leave behind a secret code embedded in the stone monuments of early man? One that reveals the extraterrestrial origins of our world. If so, why? Was it to test us? To see if we could figure the code out for ourselves? Was it simply to communicate with us? Or was it to prepare us for the day they will return? A pattern of stars repeated in monuments throughout the ancient world.
It's a global phenomenon. There might be a celestial plan.
Coordinates for a celestial constellation mapped out 7,000 years ago in sand and stone.
The builders clearly possessed some advanced knowledge of the constellations.
And clues that long-lost civilizations may have had contact with travelers from this light-years from Earth. The panoramic photo reveals more than 3,000 stars in various stages of life and gives researchers new insight into the formation of celestial objects and planetary systems. According to modern scientists, it is here, in this mysterious cloud of dust and gas, that stars and planets may have been created billions of years ago.
Astronomers usually refer to it as M42, not such a sexy name, but it's a stellar nursery. It's where stars are being born. And so this part of Orion gets a lot of study by astronomers.
Yeah, this rapid star forming region, you have these young stars and very likely many, many young planets that also form out of that gas and dust that collapse to make those stars in the Orion Nebula.
Now, stars being born obviously means that certain things are happening there on a level which we simply don't really understand.
As seen from Earth, the Orion constellation is one of the most prominent star formations in the night sky and has been revered by ancient cultures around the globe for thousands of years. Named after the Greek demigod Orion in the 8th century BC, when connected, the stars form the head, shoulders, belt, and feet of a man.
Orion is probably one of the most recognizable constellations in the sky, maybe only second to the Big Dipper. It's near the equator, and in the northern hemisphere it's visible in the winter. It has a lot of bright stars and a big square, that's the body of Orion.
The three major stars in the constellation are Alnilam, Alnitab, and Mintaka. These are the belt stars of Orion. Most people would recognize the constellation by these three stars right in a row.
According to Greek mythology, Orion was a giant born with superhuman abilities. A mighty hunter who killed animals with an unbreakable bronze club. When the Greek hero was eventually slain, he was placed among the stars for eternity.
His father was, in fact, Poseidon. So he knew a lot about oceans. Poseidon apparently taught Orion how to walk on water.
There's another story about him being so big that when he walks through the ocean, his head and shoulders are above the ocean, so get a sense of his size. All of our astronomical bodies are named after major figures from Greek mythology. We have these wonderful texts that describe stars and how it is that they got their names. To write about the stars, to write about the heavens, to write about the bodies in space is essentially to be talking about the realm of the gods.
The constellation of Orion in all traditions, and particularly the Egyptian tradition, is usually regarded as a striding man. The Greeks saw him as a hunter, and many other cultures saw him as a giant.
Is it possible, as ancient astronaut theorists suggest, that Orion was named for an actual flesh and blood being? Or might there be another, more profound reason this demigod and the stars that form his body were worshipped? Some researchers believe the answers can be found by looking at the origin stories of a civilization that thrived in the Nile River Valley more than 2,000 years before the Greeks. According to Egyptian mythology, the gods descended from the belt stars of Orion and Sirius, the brightest star in the sky.
The ancient Egyptians believed that from Sirius and Orion came beings in the form of humans, Osiris and Isis, and instigated the human race. Metaphorically, it very much matches what we know from astrophysics. We know that we are the product of stars. We're literally made of star stuff.
Sirius and Orion are critically important because they represent Isis and Osiris, the god and goddess from which all of Egyptian civilization and ultimately all of human civilization supposedly sprang. So, to the ancient Egyptians, Osiris was Orion. That constellation actually was a literal living embodiment of the great god Osiris, who was always over our heads, always looking down upon us, and always judging us, because in the end, he would be the guy that would decide whether we got eternal life or whether we were recycled back through the spiritual mulch and have to start all over again.
The ancient Egyptians were very clear that Orion was linked with creation, specifically magic creation. And so if we accept what our ancestors were saying, mythology all of a sudden becomes more interesting, because all of a sudden we see the truth as to what Orion really stands for. And it is all to do with creation, magical creation. And creation in those days was linked with the gods.
Orion and Osiris are the same in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that Osiris will return from Orion one day. Every culture in antiquity had the knowledge of somebody who returned one day. We are still expecting the return of someone.
Are the creation stories of the Egyptians actually documentation of mankind's otherworldly origins, as some ancient astronaut theorists suggest? And if so, might they have left behind more evidence, perhaps written in stone? According to the pyramid texts, a collection of religious records carved into the walls of pyramids dating back to 2400 BC, the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Unas ruled for 30 years before making his final voyage to the star system Orion.
Unas, who according to the pyramid texts apparently became great by eating the flesh of his mortal enemies and then slaying and devouring the gods themselves. Some say that this was basically belief in contiguous magic, whereby consuming the flesh of great people would bring inheritance of their powers. After devouring the gods and absorbing their souls and powers, Unas journeyed through the sky to Orion.
Might the writings in the pyramid texts actually be more than myth, as some ancient astronaut theorists believe? And could the pharaoh Unas actually have traveled into space? If so, how?
When you listen to the ancient Egyptians, they clearly tell us that the purpose of the Great Pyramid was not as a tomb, but rather as a sort of a womb of transformation. The pharaoh would enter into it as a man, and through the process of the technology that the pyramid is built for, the pharaoh is transformed into a god, so that now he is an ascended being who is capable of traveling into the stars and also returning.
They seem to have wanted to create a kind of an ancient launching pad, a sort of Cape Canaveral of the pharaohs. The idea was to build the hardware in order to somehow get the soul of the king going to the stars.
Is it possible that the pharaohs of ancient Egypt were able to travel back and forth to the stars of Orion by using the pyramids? According to ancient astronaut theorists, the proof can be found by examining an elaborate series of air shafts embedded within the Great Pyramid. Air shafts that point directly to the stars of Orion and Sirius.
There is definitely a lot of scientific data that has shown that the pyramid and the entire Giza plateau, the alignments of the air shafts in the King's and Queen's chamber are all pointing to Orion. And so that may be a message to us that that's where these extraterrestrials were from.
The whole concept that the three pyramids at Giza are in a special alignment of Orion's belt is very interesting, and this would seem to indicate that Orion was the destination for the Stargate that they were building at Giza.
Southern Egypt. 500 miles south of Cairo, on a desolate plain in the eastern region of the Sahara Desert, lies the mysterious archaeological site known as Nabta Playa. Discovered by a team of scientists in 1974, researchers believe the megalithic stones scattered here were once part of a vast and complex ritual center for an ancient civilization that thrived from 6400 to 3400 BC, just before the rise of the Egyptians.
We knew that there were many prehistoric sites in the Sahara, in this part of the Egyptian desert. What Nabta Playa is different is that it wasn't a settlement. It was clearly a ceremonial site, a very intriguing one. It had strange things. One of the centerpieces is a circle that has been called the mini Stonehenge of the desert.
For more than 3 decades, this circular stone structure and its intricate alignment to the belt stars of the Orion constellation have baffled archaeologists.
The builders of Nabta Playa seem to be aware of a level of physics and understandings of mathematics that they interline into these structures, which clearly say they possessed some advanced knowledge of the constellations.
Engineer Robert Naval and astrophysicist Thomas Brophy have studied the configuration of this mysterious monument for more than 10 years. In their book, Black Genesis, they suggest the stone circle is a star viewing diagram that aligns with the belt stars of Orion at the summer solstice.
The counter circle is this smaller stone arrangement, and the megalithic alignments point to stars. The counter circle, we think, represents a diagram that teaches how the sky moves long term. What we're looking at right here is a small mock-up of the actual calendar circle of Nabta Playa. These actual stones would come up to about your knee, and the whole circle would be about 12 feet across or so. And there are these 2 sets of gates on the outer parts of the circle. And this gate is pointing towards where the summer solstice sun rises.
According to mainstream scientists, radiocarbon dating indicates the site was constructed nearly 7,000 years ago. Taking this time frame into account, Brophy studied the positioning of the gates and the center stones, and discovered that it was then, in 4900 BC, when 3 of the center stones lined up precisely with 3 of the brightest stars in the constellation of Orion.
If we look up in the sky at that time, these 3 stones right here, they represent the Orion's belt stars exactly as they were seen at that time. So the idea is the stones represent a map of the stars in the sky.
Is it really possible, as some researchers believe, that the stones of Nabta Playa correspond with the alignment of Orion's belt as observed just before the summer solstice 7,000 years ago? If so, why and how would ancient man have created such an advanced diagram of this constellation? Mysteriously, the inhabitants of Nabta Playa vanished around 3400 BC. Some researchers believe they migrated 60 miles east, where Egypt's Nile Valley civilizations emerged in the 4th century BC.
The astronomy from Nabta Playa was exactly the same astronomy that the pyramid builders. So suddenly what we thought was origin to the pharaohs was pushed back now to these prehistoric people thousands of years before. We called them the star people, we had no idea where they came from. That lived in the Sahara when it was fertile for thousands of years before the pyramid builders. We went to try and trace their origins, and we've taken the track all the way now to the extreme southwest of Egypt. We've actually seen those people, believe it or not. They left us drawings in caves. Some of them look pretty strange. They're very tall, slender people, and with a very strange head. Now, whether this is artistic representation, I don't know, but they're certainly very mysterious.
Who are the star people? And why was the exact location of Orion so important to them? Were they simply another advanced ancient civilization lost to time? Or could it be possible that the Star People of Nabtaplaya were literally visitors from another world? Perhaps a deeper understanding of Orion can be found here, in the ruins of one of the most astronomically advanced ancient civilizations. Central Mexico. Just 35 miles northeast of Mexico City lie the ruins of Teotihuacan, an ancient city that sprawled 7 square miles and was once inhabited by more than 150,000 people. Researchers believe the impressive structures here, including 2 large pyramids and a temple, were built by the Mayans in the 2nd century BC. And like the Egyptian pyramids of Giza, the monuments point directly to the 3 stars of Orion's belt.
And this is not coincidental. The layout of the pyramids of Teotihuacan are in the formation of Orion's belt. The Mayans are very specific about Orion's belt. They say it is a point of creation. It is said that in 3114 BC, the gods came from the heavens to Earth in a convention. And this convention occurred in Teotihuacan.
We find many of these so-called Orion correlations in many other cultures. Surprising that some of these ancient structures not only form the image of Orion on the ground, but they are based on units of measurements that somehow correlate. There seems to be some sort of link. It's a very complex subject and it's very intriguing.
But how could there be similar structures pointing to Orion, built by civilizations located thousands of miles apart? Was it just a cosmic coincidence that both the Egyptians and the Mayans revered the same constellation? Or could there really be a connection between Orion and the birth of mankind?
There might be a celestial plan developed by an ancient civilization that's long gone. And that's why we find all these Orion correlations in various spots all over the globe. Because a single source at one time distributed this kind of mythological material all over the world.
It's possible that the structures that we see on Earth that are aligned with Orion were created that way because the extraterrestrials that came from Orion directed the builders to do that. They would do that so that we would remember the place where these beings came from, and also to align ourselves with the energies coming from Orion.
Northern Iraq, 1849. On the eastern bank of the Tigris River, near the city of Mosul, a team of archaeologists from the British Museum discovers thousands of clay tablets containing cuneiform script they believe to have been written by Babylonian priests in the 2nd century BC. Among the tablets found were 2 mysterious relics that have become known as the Babylonian star catalogs. According to translations of the ancient text, these tablets describe the precise movements of various celestial bodies, now known as the zodiac.
We know so much about the history of Babylonia because of the excavation and deciphering of huge numbers of these cuneiform texts. They were steeped in a religious view of life, and intrinsic to their religion was devotion to the gods of the planets, different constellations. So this was what we call the cosmic religion.
According to some researchers, these clay tablets provide proof that the ancient civilization of Babylon obtained celestial knowledge from star travelers.
The Babylonian star catalogs are an interesting collection of information with accurate mathematical equations, distance between planets, esoteric knowledge that a primitive civilization really shouldn't have. It really starts to raise the question as to how they got this information, what they were using it for.
Like many other ancient cultures, the Babylonians describe Orion as both a constellation and a supreme being. In their writings, Orion is referred to as the loyal shepherd of heaven and the chief god of heavenly realms. Might these records actually provide more evidence connecting ancient man to otherworldly beings?
For the Babylonians, this constellation of Orion was called Sipazi Anu, which means the shepherd of Anu. Usually we would translate that the shepherd of heaven because Anu was seen as the god of heaven. If we go back even further, we find an earlier depiction of Orion as in a bird-like form and was referred to as a messenger.
The figure of a bird was located on the stones behind the figure of the shepherd. His position may indicate that he was bringing messages back and forth from Earth to Orion. Now the real question is, how did he do this? Is this all meant to be taken symbolically? Is it possible that what we have here is a very rudimentary description of a type of interstellar communication device? Are the Babylonian star catalogs potentially even documenting an ancient extraterrestrial space station orbiting the Earth, inhabited by ancient aliens who came from Orion?
Is it possible the Babylonian gods were actually extraterrestrial messengers from Orion? And if so, might these otherworldly visitors have created mankind here in the Fertile Crescent, where civilization historically started more than 5,000 years ago?
The Babylonians had a strong tradition of the origin of human beings, and it has some variations, but the basic principle that you find amongst Babylonians is the gods wanted to sleep a lot, and they wanted to eat a lot, and they got tired of doing the farming themselves and preparing the food, and so they created a group of lesser beings, human beings is what it was, to do the farming and so on for them.
On the edge of Mesopotamia, the dawn of civilization, this was one of the first spots where ancient aliens came to begin to seed civilization on the planet. Civilization that grew into the civilization of Sumer and Babylonia. If you look at the Sumerian hieroglyphs, the Egyptian hieroglyphics, the stories of the Maya, if you look at all these cultures, what you'll see is the same story told in different ways in different languages. Those who came from the stars came here and they started human civilization.
Are the origin stories of Babylon, located in the cradle of civilization, the ultimate proof of our divine connection to the Orion constellation? And if so, might there be a profound reason the stars of Orion's belt are located above the navel, the place on the body symbolically linked with the origin of humans, as ancient astronaut theorists suggest?
Many ancient cultures point to Orion's belt as the gateway for life. The Mayans, the Egyptians, all these various cultures seem to reference the beginnings of life and the endings of life transferring or passing through the Orion's belt. Is this somehow some type of seeding of life that's taking place here on Earth in a connection with the Orion constellation?
It would seem that there was some awareness for the ancient peoples that they had a sense for Orion being at the heart of our galaxy.
And I think the next question which we need to begin to answer is this. Is it possible that somehow this birthing place of stars also allows us to make a connection with other creatures, with intelligences
some ancient cultures suggest, might there be a way to summon the return of our otherworldly creators? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and point to evidence in an epic alignment to the stars of Orion, located in the American Southwest. Black Mesa, northeastern Arizona. The Native American Indian tribe has called these peaks of the Colorado Plateau home for more than 1,000 years. High above the Arizona desert, their reservation, encompassing more than 1.5 million acres, consists of 12 villages. Ancient astronaut theorists have studied these mysterious sites for years, discovering what they consider to be countless pieces of evidence of extraterrestrial contact in the ancient past. According to their research, both the Hopi landscape and the tribe's mythology are centered on Orion.
The Hopi migrated out of the Southwest after a series of building villages and abandoning these villages. They came to these three primary mesas in northern Arizona. They call them first, second, and third mesas.
The Hopi mesas shape Orion's belt's image, and it is said that the Hopi specifically came here because of the shape. So we know that the Hopi are extremely interested in Orion's belt. This is the center of their universe. They say it is a place where they can make contact with the gods.
According to some researchers, not only do the three mesas represent the stars in Orion's belt, but when connected to other Hopi landmarks throughout the Southwest, the collective sites map the entire body of the Orion constellation.
Every major star of the constellation, it corresponds to a ruined site or a village that the Hopi are currently living in. For instance, the left shoulder of Orion is a place called Mupati. It's north of Flagstaff, Arizona. And they built this ruin about 1120 AD. They lived there for a century or so, and then they abandoned this place. There's another place called Pomology Ruin. It's by Winslow, Arizona, and this corresponds to the right shoulder of Orion and the star Betelgeuse. The Hopi also settled up north of the mesas. This corresponds to the star Rigel, and there's a whole complex of villages that corresponds to the right foot of Orion. The star is Siph. So you have the star Mirror, as above, so below. That's what the Hopi were trying to achieve when they built this pattern, which took about 3 centuries to construct.
But how did the Hopi ancestors know to align their homes and sacred places so perfectly with the Orion constellation? Is it possible that they received help from star travelers, as some researchers believe? According to Hopi myth, the creator god, Masao, directed the tribe over hundreds of years as they migrated to the three mesas. The place Masao instructed them to wait for his return.
The god Masao was there at the beginning, waiting for the Hopi. This is a very spooky looking god. This god has large round eyes and a round mouth and a big bulbous head. He taught the Hopi agricultural ways. He's frequently seen with a staff in his right hand, like the constellation Orion. Masao told the people where to build their villages. There's also tales about a certain star that the Hopi would follow. Now, a star that moves across the sky and stops when the Hopi are supposed to stop and build their village. That sounds like some sort of extraterrestrial craft that were guiding the Hopi across the desert.
This is Fahada Butte, where, according to ancient Hopi legends, their god, Masao, descended from the sky. At night, the Orion constellation would basically hang in the sky, right above this butte. And the story goes that Masao landed on top of this platform. So my question is, did some type of an extraterrestrial visitor land on top of this butte right here in some type of a craft? And the answer is yes. Someone or something from the cosmos descended.
Could the Hopi god of creation, Masao, actually have been an extraterrestrial traveler from Orion, as ancient astronaut theorists contend? And if so, why did this god instruct the Hopi to migrate around the southwest in the pattern of this constellation?
Is it merely coincidence that the Hopi aligned their cities with Orion just as the ancient Egyptians did? I don't think so. I think this is clear evidence that they were instructed to do so.
The Hopi people were trying to pay homage to their star ancestors. The ancestors that came from the constellation Orion, and gave them this information about the constellation and the place that they came from. And that's why they built this pattern on the Arizona desert. It's more or less a way that the Hopi could memorialize the origin of their celestial ancestors that came from Orion.
The Hopis are saying that at each point of creation, each cycle of time, Masao makes contact with them and quite often tells them that an end of a cycle is going to happen, and that he safeguards them from destruction. It is felt that this creator deity is intricately linked with Orion and somehow only allows communication when somehow the geographical layout resembles Orion's belt. So what they're hoping for now is really the return of Masao.
Is it possible, as ancient astronaut theorists believe, that ancient Hopi legends of the creator god Masao provide further proof of contact with our extraterrestrial ancestors from Orion? And if so, might the Hopi have been signaling for the return of these otherworldly